Hello and welcome to the JSA Studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today I'm coming at you with the reaction to Week 3 of college football, specifically for the Big Ten. As always, we're going to go team by team and break down how I thought they did this weekend. But before we get into the video proper, I would like to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. And now with the intro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to do, and that is to get started. Starting with the Treading Water tier. The teams in the Treading Water tier are Wisconsin, Illinois, Nebraska, Iowa, and Maryland. Now, the Treading Water tier itself doesn't have a negative or positive connotation. It basically means that what happened this past week didn't change my opinion of you. So, for example, Wisconsin got obliterated by Alabama. Okay, cool. I expected you to get obliterated by Alabama. I think you're still the same caliber of team last week as you are this week. However, Tyler Van Dyke's injury does kind of throw a wrench into that. I think Tyler Van Dyke was going to be okay for you this year. He might get a 7th year of eligibility next year. Who knows? But he was not a big time difference maker, in my opinion. I still think this is a team this year that is going to struggle to get bowl eligible. I think this is a worse Wisconsin team than it was last year in a significantly better Big Ten conference from top to bottom. Moving on to Illinois, you guys started slow. I did expect a little bit of a letdown after getting a ranked win against Kansas, but eventually you figured it out. I would also like to congratulate this Illinois team on being ranked. This is a ranked football team. They are ranked 24, and they deserve it. They've looked good the first 3 weeks of the season, and they beat a ranked Kansas team, even though, admittedly, Kansas was probably overrated heading into this year, including by myself. I thought Kansas was going to be like a solid 8-4 or 9-3 team. That's unlikely to be the case. You've got a suddenly very, very interesting matchup with Nebraska this Friday, which we will talk about on the video on Friday. So that will be a major part of that video. Will be breaking down Illinois and Nebraska. So go ahead and subscribe if you want to see that on Friday. But all in all, this is a serious team, and looking at their schedule, if you can pull off what in my opinion would be an upset over Nebraska, you could be staring down the barrel of 10-2. I think when you get to that Michigan game at home in mid-October, you're probably going to be favored. I think there's a definitive possibility Michigan enters that game at either 3-3 or potentially even 2-4, depending upon what happens with Minnesota and Washington. I think both of those games are, maybe with Minnesota you lean more towards Michigan, and maybe with Washington you lean more towards Washington, but 50-50 style of games. I think you're going to be favored in that game by probably something close to a touchdown. And right now, there's a real possibility you are a better team than Michigan. So that could be a big win for this program. And then you look at the rest of the schedule. Yes, you play Penn State after Nebraska. You do get an extra day, so to speak, to prepare. I think Penn State's really good. I think they're going to kind of get themselves cleaned up this week heading into that matchup. You play Purdue, who's horrible. Oregon seemingly has kind of cleaned it up a little bit, so that might be a tough game. But outside of that, Michigan State, you should win. Rutgers, you should win. Northwestern, you should win. Minnesota, you should win. Those are all games that you should win based upon the caliber of team that I think you are. So this Nebraska game might be the difference between 9 and 10 wins at the end of the season. This is a really good and really well-coached team. Nebraska, the other team in that big-time matchup this Friday. I do think your win over Colorado is a good win. I think Colorado is probably going to end up either 6-6 or 7-5. Might end up 5-7 if they get some unlucky breaks, but they have a fairly manageable schedule. They should beat Baylor, in my opinion. They should beat UCF, in my opinion. They've got a real good chance to beat Cincinnati and Texas Tech as well. Kansas is not the team that we thought they were. That could be another winnable game for Colorado. So I do think Colorado is not a good Power 4 team by any stretch of the imagination, but that is a solid team. I think they're probably going to make a bowl game this year. So you look at that and you dominated them. Now, Colorado also has some glaring weaknesses on their team that you were able to exploit. However, that is still a solid win in my opinion. Dylan Raiola looked really, really good 3 games through the season. Now, he is playing the best defense he's seen against Illinois this week, and I don't know how he's going to respond to that, to his first big primetime game, so to speak. It will be at home, which will help him. However, we don't particularly know how he's going to respond. I think he will respond fine, and I think you are favored, and I think I probably will end up picking you to win that game. However, that is going to be a tough test for this football team. Moving on to Iowa. Iowa, man, you guys, your defense isn't all that it's cut out to be, is it? Now, I know they didn't give up 24 points. They gave up a punt return. Okay, I get it. I understand. But your defense has got some pretty glaring holes in it this year, specifically along the defensive line. This is not a Iowa defensive line that has been up to snuff with where the program is traditionally, in my opinion. I think the secondary is still borderline elite, fantastic. They're great. Okay, I don't know if they're truly elite, but they're very, very good at a minimum. I think they're getting kind of hosed by the lack of pass rush, which, again, I already kind of touched on with the defensive line. I think Cade McNamara is a very streaky quarterback for you guys. Sometimes I think he's going to make the dumb throws. Sometimes he's going to be really efficient, and you're going to move right down the field. You do have the running game and an explosive running back as well as a solid special teams unit. This is a quality football team. I think if you had beaten Iowa State, we might be talking about this team a little bit differently. However, you didn't beat Iowa State. You probably should have. I think you are a better football team than Iowa State. But that's a rivalry game. You never know what can happen. And finally, we have Maryland to round out this part of the treading water tier. And my opinion on Maryland has not changed this week. I think you're probably one of the bottom 5 teams in the Big Ten. I think you're going to really struggle to get to a bowl game this year. It might happen. It might not. I don't know. But I think this is a rebuilding year for this program. I don't think you have a quarterback. And I do question if Mike Locksley is going to be around after this season. However, you still beat Virginia. Virginia was 2-0. I don't think they're a very good ACC team by any means. I think they're probably one of the 5 worst ACC teams. However, you guys won. Big Ten represent. Woo! And finally, the second half of the treading water tier is, of course, the teams with byes. Arguably the 3 best Big Ten teams and Penn State. No, I'm kidding. Arguably the 3 best Big Ten teams in Ohio State, USC, and Penn State. And then Rutgers, who I think is solid, got a decent chance to make it to a bowl game. However, that is going to be a challenge for this team. These teams all didn't play this week, so why would my opinion change of them? They are the second half of the treading water tier. Next tier, we have the I don't know what to think about you tier. And this is a tier that is 3 teams deep. And those 3 teams are Northwestern, Minnesota, and Michigan State. Now, when it comes to the case of Northwestern and Minnesota, this has more to do with their Power 4 matchups that they had earlier in the season. Minnesota probably should have beaten North Carolina. Now, North Carolina has proved that even with the backup quarterback, that they are a solid football team. I think they've got a chance to win 7 or 8 games this year. Obviously, Mac Brown is a fantastic football coach. He's a future Hall of Famer and has won a national title and turned Texas and North Carolina previously into a consistent powerhouse sort of program. So I do think North Carolina is a good team. You guys went neck and neck with them, and if not for a missed field goal, you would have won the game. And as far as Northwestern goes, I did predict Duke to beat you. I like Duke. I think they're a solid ACC team. I think they might win 7 or 8 games this year. I like their quarterback. However, you guys lost to Duke by the same margin and the same exact score as UConn lost to Duke. So maybe Duke isn't as good as I thought they were, and maybe that loss isn't as good as I thought it was. I don't really know what to make of these teams yet. I think it's going to be illuminated as we go on throughout the season. However, these are teams that could end up 4-8 or 8-4. I just don't know. I haven't really figured them out yet. As far as Michigan State goes, this team is going to ride or die by Childs and how he plays. When he's on, this is a team that can put up points in a hurry, and they can put up a lot of points over the course of a game. However, he's very streaky even in the games, like on a drive-by-drive, throw-to-throw basis even. He did have an interception that was a horrendous decision and a bad ball called back this past week. You dominated Prairie View. Congratulations, okay? You won the games that you are supposed to have won. I was a little bit surprised that you beat Maryland. However, Maryland is worse than I thought they were, and you are better than I thought you were heading into the season. However, I don't know if this is going to be a team that can get over the hump this year and get to a bowl game. You have an incredibly difficult schedule. You play a really good Boston College team. They went neck and neck with a top 10 team in the country in Missouri this past week, and I think Missouri is legitimately a top 10 team in the country. I think they are really good. I don't think that's a misranking of Missouri being too high. I think Boston College should be ranked. I think they are one of the 25 best teams in the country. So that's going to be a tough matchup for you this Saturday. You win that game, and I'm going to expect you to beat Iowa. I'm going to expect you to beat Michigan, which I already kind of do. Maybe Indiana, maybe Illinois. You should beat Purdue. You should beat Rutgers. So you're looking at 7-8 wins if you can win against a very good Boston College team, in my opinion. If you lose, I don't know if you're going to get bowl eligible. It makes it way harder if you lose here. You're 3-1. You're going to lose to Ohio State. You're going to lose to Oregon. And then that puts you at 3-3. And then you've got probably a 50-50 game with Michigan, maybe a 60-40 game with Indiana, and a 60-40 game with Illinois before finishing out with a game against Purdue and a game against Rutgers, which I don't think either of those teams are very good. You probably should win those games, but I don't know if you're going to be able to win anything beyond those 2 games. I think Indiana's really solid. We're going to get to Indiana at the end of this video, but I think Indiana's really solid. I've already talked about Illinois. I think Michigan State has a chance to get to 6-6, even if they lose against Boston College at 8 this Saturday. But it does make it harder. It means you're going to have to upset one of Iowa or Michigan. And I think you're probably going to have a better shot upsetting Michigan, even though that game is at home for Michigan. I don't know what to think of this team. And this week is going to tell me a lot about this team, because I think Boston College is really good. I do, genuinely. I think Castellanos, the quarterback, is fantastic. I think that is a team that can maybe take a run at the ACC. I don't think they're going to win the ACC, but they can make a run for it. Next tier that we have is the get off my screen tier. I don't want to watch you. This is bad. These are bad football teams. Purdue, I believed in you. I thought you looked pretty solid the first 2 weeks of the season, and I think Notre Dame sucks. I thought you had a chance to pull off the upset, Ed. Boy, I was fucking wrong. From like 2 minutes into the game, you were not going to win. And that was not great. I did end up going 10-3 in my picks for this past week, but one of those losses was picking Purdue to upset Notre Dame. I believed in you, Purdue. I used to think that Ryan Walters was a solid young coach, and that does not appear to be the case anymore, in my opinion. I thought he was really good at Illinois as the DC, but he clearly, at this point, is probably not cut out to be a head coach. UCLA, I expected you to lose to Indiana. Honestly, I expected you to lose pretty bad to Indiana. But holy hell, that was awful. And I knew when you struggled to beat Hawaii that this was probably the worst team in the Big Ten. But man, you looked bad. You looked awful. That was incredible how bad you looked. And you guys wanted to fire Chip Kelly because you went like, what'd you go, 5-7 last year? You don't got a shot in hell at 5 wins this year, dog. So, I don't know. I think that was a mistake, running Chip Kelly out of the building. Genuinely, I think he was a good fit for the program. I think you could have ended up having one of the best coaches in college football be your head coach for a relatively cheap contract and have basically no real shot at him leaving for a bigger / better job, because no one was going to hire him when they don't think he's ever going to be able to pull off what he did at Oregon again. So I don't know. I thought that was a perfect fit, but you obviously didn't, or at least the UCLA administration didn't. And now you're awful. So yeah. And there's one more team in the get off my screen tier, and that's Michigan. And Jesus Christ, what happened? What happened to this program? I mean, I made a whole ass hour-and-a-half long video talking about how awful Michigan was in the first 3 games of the season. But I fear that I might be losing all faith in this program to even get to a bowl game this year. And that's absolutely unacceptable. This is a team that could have double-digit players drafted into the NFL. Genuinely. And I don't want to hear for a goddamn second what I know some people are going to say, which is, oh, they're not playing well, they're not going to get drafted. Nonsense, okay? Texas A&M went 8-4 and had like 10 people drafted, okay? So you don't have to be 11-1, 12-0, 13-0 in order to get double-digit people drafted, okay? This team has a fuckload of NFL talent on it. And the fact that I think this is a 50-50 whether they're going to make a bowl game is absolutely unacceptable. Now, you can go back into my video history and you can listen to me talk about Sharon Moore when he was hired. I basically said everything that everybody else said, which is, oh yeah, maybe he can keep the culture intact. This team returns a whole lot. They should be fine with him coming back. Hopefully the offensive line will continue to be very good. And no, none of that has been the case. However, in that video, I also said Sharon Moore would have been my 3rd choice for the head coach position. I would have gone after Kalen DeBoer. I would have then tried to get Jesse Minter to be the head coach, because what Jesse Minter does for this team, being the defensive play caller, is far, far harder to get than what Sharon Moore does. Another reason of my confidence in that video in Sharon Moore was that I thought he had hired Steve Clinkscale at the time to be the defensive coordinator. And Steve Clinkscale, which, again, say what you want to about him, he's in the NFL being a really, really good secondary coach, okay? He was an elite caliber secondary coach for Michigan. And I felt like he earned the opportunity to be the defensive play caller. And I think if he was the defensive coordinator, not only do I think this team would be significantly better off defensively, but I would also have a lot more confidence in Sharon Moore's regime. The fact remains that this is a remarkably poorly coached team at every position in every way. Our technique is ass. Our play calling is ass. Our game planning is ass. It's all horrible. They don't have any discipline. They don't know where to line up half the time on defense. And I shudder to think what this team is going to look like next year without 4 day 1 or day 2 draft picks starting on the defensive line. Because as bad as it has been, the defensive line has kind of been holding the fort down just a little bit. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and look up some defensive highlights from last year and watch Will Johnson. Because the Will Johnson that we saw last year is not the same player as the Will Johnson we saw this year. Now, I did kind of talk about how Will Johnson does have a little bit of Darius Slay in him, in the sense that he'll get beat consistently by mediocre wide receivers, but then make life hell for really, really good wide receivers. But goddamn, he was significantly better last year than he was this year. And man, I don't know what to say about the future of this program, because what Michigan lost this year, everybody's talking about what Michigan lost from last year to this year's team. What Michigan is going to lose after this year dwarfs what they lost last year. Michigan is going to lose, for sure, Rayshon Benny, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Will Johnson, Makari Page, Miles Hinton, Josh Preby, Colston Loveland, Khalil Mullings, Donovan Edwards, and they'll need to break in a new QB next year. Plus, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw 1 or 2 wide receivers, maybe even 3, transfer out of this program, as well as losing Jason Barham, Ernest Hausman. Rod Moore might not want to come back next year because of how ass this team is. And Derek Moore could also look to go elsewhere or to the NFL. So there's a very real possibility that this team is looking at 11 new starters on defense, while losing QB1, QB2, RB1, RB2, your starting tight end, your starting left tackle, and your starting left guard. So, next year, sure as fuck ain't going to be better than this year, because you're not going to have first-round talent on defense, and you're not going to have 2 veteran offensive linemen that got a good-ass chance to get drafted, too. The way I see this Michigan team playing makes me think that the rest of this season is not going to go well. USC this week, probably a multi-score loss. Minnesota, that's a 50-50 game. Washington, probably a loss. That's like a 60-40, 65-35 kind of tilt towards Washington on the road in a very hard environment to play, when the fans are going to be screaming out of their minds because we beat them in the national championship this past year. Then you go to Illinois, and Illinois will be favored in that game. Then you have Michigan State at home, rivalry game, statement opportunity for new head coach Jonathan Smith. That is looking an awful lot like an L to me. Then you have Oregon, multi-score loss. Indiana, the way they're playing football right now, that's a multi-score loss. Then you have Northwestern. Now, I don't know what to think of Northwestern, but that's probably a 50-50 game. And then you have Ohio State, and that's a multi-score loss. This team, it would not shock me if they lost every game, okay? Like, it's not very likely that's going to happen, but I can see a path for them to lose to Minnesota. I can see a path for them to lose to Northwestern and Indiana and Michigan State. I can see all of those things happening. And I don't think they're going to be favored against Washington. I don't think they're going to be favored against Illinois. Hell, at that point, they might not even be favored against Michigan State. And the fact that this team isn't even going to get to 8-4, which what I thought was their realistic floor, is absolutely unacceptable. And Sharon Moore will probably enter next year on the hottest seat in college football. And man, I don't think it's going to go particularly well for him. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give you a list of, potential coaching candidates or whatever the fuck. I don't know. But I'm not completely out on Sharon Moore yet. Maybe Alex Orji can come in and this offense can get a semblance of consistency, or maybe Jack Tuttle is that guy. I don't know. It's sure as fuck not Davis Warren. I knew that after one game. But this team could also shock me and end up 8-4, where their only losses are to 4 teams that are flat out and straight up better than them. And, I think Illinois might also be in that category, and also maybe Indiana. But if this team can get some consistency on offense, then I think that's going to help the defense. The defense did, in all honesty, look a little bit better against Arkansas State until they started putting the backups in, and Michigan just doesn't have the depth that they've had in previous years, so there was a massive fall off. So 18-28 is a little bit misleading, but Arkansas State is also the worst team that Michigan played by a significant margin. Now, maybe Sharon Moore gets his head out of his ass and he starts Greg Crippen at center, and he lets Andrew Gentry or Jeff Percy get a shot at right tackle, and then maybe the run game can get going, and then maybe we'll do some play-action boot passes so that Alex Orji has the option to run or dump it off for an easy throw. I don't know. I think those are all things that Michigan could do to potentially get some consistency on offense. They're not going to beat USC, but if they look better than they have the first 3 games, then maybe I can get some confidence in Sharon Moore turning this team around. However, we don't have a history with Sharon Moore. He's never been a head coach before. He's never proved that he can build a program. He's never proved that he can inherit a good program and keep it going. Either way, if you had told me preseason that Michigan was going to go 7-5 or 6-6, I would have said, cool, when do we fire Sharon Moore? Because that would have been unacceptable to me. And I made a whole ass video talking about Sharon Moore and my expectations for this season. And I said my expectations were 11 wins. And they're sure as fuck not going to get to 11. So Sharon Moore, as far as I'm concerned, is on a relatively thin ice. Now, I know he's not going to get fired. I'm not delusional, okay? They're not going to fire him this year, pretty much no matter what. He's going to get a chance to be the head coach next year. Maybe the team can look decent if they fire both coordinators and get some new guys in there, which is a very likely thing to happen. However, maybe that doesn't help at all, and maybe it's an institutional problem, and Sharon Moore is the institution. Anyway, moving on. Washington fell victim to the Pac-12's revenge. They lost a rivalry game. I'm not overly concerned. I still think this is a team that can win 7 or 8 games. I'm fairly confident in Jed Fisk and the coaching staff. I think he'll be able to consistently get this team going a little bit. I don't think you're going to reach the heights that you have with Kalen DeBoer. I mean, Kalen DeBoer's the heir apparent to Nick Saban. Like, that's an elite coach. Might be one of the 5 best coaches in college football. I don't think Jed Fisk is there. So I'm not positive that you're going to be able to reach those heights where you're contending for conference championships or anything like that. But I think there's a real good shot that Jed Fisk, maybe twice or 3 times a decade, could put together a team capable of doing that. You do have a couple of chances at redemption this year. You play Northwestern at Rutgers in the next 2 weeks. I think you should win both of those games. Then you bring Michigan to Seattle. You play Iowa on the road. Indiana will be a tough game. You play USC, Penn State, UCLA, Oregon. So you could be looking at 7-5. You could be looking at 6-6. You could be looking at maybe 8-4. If you could pull off an upset. That's the way I sort of see this team. My opinion on them hasn't particularly changed because you lost a rivalry game. And finally, we have the tier that you've all been waiting for, and that is the Scarlett Johansson tier. And you may be wondering, why is this called the Scarlett Johansson tier? And that's because these teams are looking pretty. As far as Indiana goes, you boat raced UCLA, who's a bad football team. We'll get to the rankings here after this, where UCLA will be at or near the bottom of those rankings. Indiana, you look like a really well-coached football team that knows what they need to do in order to win. You look like you are a team that is going to have a serious chance to maybe get to even the 10-win mark. I mean, you pretty much play Nebraska, Michigan, and Ohio State the rest of the way. And I think you can beat Michigan. I think you can beat Nebraska. You're not going to beat Ohio State. But there's a possibility that this team is 10-2, maybe sneaking into the Big Ten championship game because you don't play Oregon, you don't play USC, you don't play Penn State. And actually earlier, I forgot to mention that you play Washington, which is probably a 50-50 game, but that's at home. You're at home versus Indiana. You're at home versus Nebraska. This is a favorable schedule. If you can win 2 of those 3 50-50 games, you're staring down the barrel of 10-2, which is crazy. You know, this is a very easy schedule. You know what I mean? Like this, you kind of got the lucky straws, but this is a real football team that's got a shot at the playoffs. They just need to pull off an upset or 2 along the way. And that is absolutely crazy to think about. Meanwhile, Oregon looks like it's kind of figured it out finally. The defense is questionable, but it also kind of might just be like that. There are teams that have won conference championships and finished in the top 11 with worse defenses than you have and worse offenses than you have, okay? But I do think that this is a team that maybe can't really compete with Ohio State like I thought they were going to at the beginning of the year. I was so high on Oregon, and they did kind of look like the team that I thought they were going to look like heading into this year, this past week against Oregon State, who Oregon State's, I think, is a solid team. Oregon State's got a chance to win 8 games, okay? I think that's a solid team. You're going to boat race UCLA. You're going to boat race Michigan State probably. And then after that, you've got that big matchup with Oregon. And then Illinois all of a sudden is a little bit more questionable. And you have the rivalry game at the end of the season with Washington. But this is a team that 9-3 is probably the realistic floor. And you could say 11-1 is a realistic ceiling. However, you could also say 12-0 is a realistic ceiling. Either way, these two teams looked fantastic this past week. Indiana is a sneaky pick for the potential playoff run. Oregon is probably going to make the playoffs this year. And I really like this Oregon football team. So much so, in fact, that I bumped them up a spot from the last time I did these rankings. Going from top to bottom here, Ohio State remains at number 1. That is unchanged. Oregon and Penn State swap the 2 and 3 positions. USC moves up from 5 to 4. Nebraska moves from 6 to 5. Illinois shoots up 8 spots from 2 weeks ago because I didn't do this ranking last week. Iowa remains at number 7. Washington remains at number 8. Indiana goes to number 4, also a fast riser. Michigan falls 6 spots from number 4 to number 10. Minnesota remains idle at 11. Michigan State moves up 4 spots to 12. Rutgers is down 1 from 12. Maryland down 4 from 10. Northwestern up 2 spots to 15. Wisconsin, a team that I was fairly high on heading into the season. The injury of Tyler Van Dyke does kind of play a little bit into that, but more so it was the fact that I saw the way that this team has looked the first 3 weeks and realized I was way too high on them. Wisconsin falls 7 spots. Purdue also falls 2 spots down to the second to last place. And UCLA remains exactly where they ought to be, dead last. But that's just me, and what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. It's at this point in the video, I'd like to remind you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree at any point, or you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. And now with the outro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.